This is sort of in my mind, the big story of this treaty, that it has written into it, and it was sort of an agreement before the negotiations began, that the new treaty, quote, should not undermine existing global and regional instruments, frameworks, and bodies. There's sort of a long phrase that's kind of capturing everything that's already out there. So this agreement can't undermine what the fisheries management organizations are doing, or the Seabed Authority, or the International Maritime Organization. It has to coordinate between and work with, create interfaces between itself and those organizations. But it can't tell them what to do.
Welcome to the Mongabay Newscast. I'm your co-host, Mike DiGirolamo.
And I'm your co-host, Rachel Donald.
Bringing you weekly conversations with experts, authors, scientists, and activists working on the front lines of conservation, shining a light on some of the most pressing issues facing our planet, and holding people in power to account. This podcast is edited on Gadigal land. Today on the newscast, we speak with Elizabeth Mendenhall, an associate professor in the Department of Marine Affairs at the University of Rhode Island. And in this conversation with co-host Rachel Donald, Mendenhall unpacks what is being referred to as the High Seas Treaty, originally and still known as the Biodiversity Beyond Natural Jurisdiction Agreement. In her original commentary with Fuad Bata, both argue that the name High Seas is inaccurate and does not account for what they say the treaty was originally meant to address. In a literal sense, biodiversity that is beyond natural jurisdictions of states. Mendenhall outlines specifically what the various zones of the ocean encompass from a geopolitical and governance perspective, and also how there is a critical lack of coordination between the international organizations that govern the various sectors that use the ocean. The original BBNJ agreement, which is the third agreement under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, took nearly 2 decades to debate and reach an agreement on. And while many experts agree it was a landmark moment, Mendenhall stresses the risk and potential for business-as-usual exploitation and damage to biodiversity, depending on how states interpret and implement it in the years to come.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us on the Mongabay Newscast.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
You are here to discuss the High Seas Treaty, which is what it has become known. But before we get into that, I think it would be good to get an overview of the oceans and their biodiversity and how they're currently governed. So to begin with, how biodiverse are our oceans?
Extremely biodiverse. I mean, I'm a political scientist, so this isn't my area of expertise, but the ocean is, we think of it as one place because it is contiguous, connected, because creatures move around throughout, really large scales in the ocean. But there's also a lot of particular places in the ocean, particular environmental characteristics and particular ecosystem characteristics that need sort of special consideration about what they bring to the larger picture of biodiversity. So the ocean offers a lot to us in terms of knowledge, resources, experiences. And I think until the last 50 years or so, we really didn't have a full understanding of how important the ocean was to our human world.
It is something that is now coming up increasingly in the news. If you want to go back down the chain as far as you can, what is the source of life? It is the oceans.
Yeah, and I think, most of us grew up learning in school the idea of life beginning in the oceans and then that first slimy fish creature theoretically, crawling out and starting land-based, communities of life. But since the 70s, we've been learning more about creatures at the base of the food chain, autotrophs that make their own food, not using the sun, not using photosynthesis.
Oh.
And so the discovery of hydrothermal vents, these areas in the ocean that shoot out very hot, mineral-rich water, we discovered have very unique ecosystems around them that include creatures that do chemosynthesis, that make their own food using chemical reactions. And the sun isn't a part of it at all. And so that's causing scientists to kind of rethink how life might have started on the planet in the first place, because we had sort of all these assumptions about the necessity of the sun. to the beginning of life, and now we have to rethink. And that's a new discovery from the late 1970s that we're still sort of wrapping our collective heads around.
Oh, I feel like 2024 and all of the years to come and in the past are the years of trying to wrap our head around what is going on. The big picture.
Will we ever get there? No, we will not, because the ocean is always changing too.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in to listen to the first few minutes of this podcast. To hear the full conversation, find the Mongabay newscast wherever you get your podcasts from and click subscribe. You can also get each new episode straight to your inbox by subscribing to Mongabay's weekly newsletter at mongabay.com. And if you really want to support us, you can donate to our Patreon at patreon.com/Mongabay. Thanks for listening.